When claims about a few well-made, supposedly ancient Egyptian vases are made, a burial site named Toshka comes up.
These vases, these hard stone vases, and Joanna was very right when she said these aren't pottery. We have gourds made from obsidian or rock crystal. These are all pre-dynastic. They've even been found in sites as far back as Toshka, which is 14,500 years old, that's been carbon dated. This site's now underwater thanks to the building of the Aswan Dam. Very primitive burial. You can see the guy's in like a fetal position, but he was found in a burial with primitive pottery and precision-made stone vases.
Except no stone vases were found in Toshka, nor is the photo on the right from Toshka. Nor was this man found with any stone vases, much less any precision ones. In the best case, showing this collage is deceptive. In the worst case, it's an outright lie. Let's dig deeper into this. This video is a follow-up to our episode on the unusually precise, supposedly ancient Egyptian hardstone vases. We'll first discuss the Toshka photos. Then we'll explain how, inadvertently, they draw attention to a big problem for advocates of ancient high technology. While we often colorize old photos on this channel, we won't do this if the identity of a specific photo is discussed. If you want to see more videos, please like and subscribe. First, a short summary. There are hard stone vases found in early ancient Egyptian sites. Some are in museums, some in private collections. Unless a vase can be traced to a specific site, we can't be sure it's authentic. This applies to both private collections and museums. Proponents of ancient high technology scanned a number of vases from private collections. A few of the scanned vases, not all, show surface precision of a few thousandths of an inch. As shown in our previous video on this subject, these tolerances are about what you get on a random modern cemetery vase, made in a random Chinese workshop. This level of precision usually comes from stable, rotary, well-centered motion, that is, something lathe-like, though not necessarily a modern lathe. Members of the vase scan team say that this is too precise for early ancient Egypt. They propose that ancient Egypt inherited such hard stone vases from an even older civilization.
Which begs the question, do you think those pre-dynastic people made these vessels? There's no indication that they did. We don't know how old they are. I think this is a fundamental concept when it comes to looking at the mysteries of ancient Egypt, this idea of inheritance. They're just not going back far enough.
That civilization, which existed more than 10,000 years ago, supposedly had high technology, such as precise, powered machines. When such claims about precise stone vases are made, a burial site named Toshka is often brought up, usually presented as these photos. Seeing this slide, the viewer assumes that this is a photo of a display in some museum because of the label. Maybe the two photos have been repositioned to be closer, but any rational person will think that this label informs us about the two photos. The big caption on top also tells us that everything we see is related to Toshka. But this is not true. Yes, there is, or rather was, a real ancient burial site called Toshka. Today it's under Lake Nasser. It was found in mid-1960s by Fred Wendorf, and it really dated back more than 10,000 years. But no stone jars nor even pottery was ever found there, only small lithics and stones for grinding. Here are all the graves from Toshka 8905. The photo on the right is not from Toshka at all. This photo was taken in 1907 by George Reisner in Shalal near Aswan. Here's the original. Moreover, none of the vessels in this photo are made of stone. We know this because Reisner described each grave. Here it is, grave 149. All 5 vessels in this grave are pink or brown ware. These are types of pottery. The photo on the right is not from Toshka, and there are no stone vessels in it at all. What about the other photo? Well, it's a complete mystery. In another presentation on stone vases, we see what looks like a museum label saying it's from Toshka 8905. The big problem here is that this photo does not appear anywhere in Wendorf's mid-60s reports on Toshka, nor even in any of Reisner's reports from his 1907-1911 work. The time and place of this photo is a mystery. Let's list the possibilities. 1. It's an unpublished photo by Wendorf from Toshka 8905. But the details don't look right because we have actual photos from that site. At Toshka 8905, Wendorf had a tall sun umbrella and a portable table near the site. We also see a man in dark clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. We don't see these in the mysterious photo supposedly from there. Possibility 2. It's an unpublished photo from Toshka by Wendorf, but not from site 8905. But in our context of stone vases, it still wouldn't matter, because Wendorf did not find any stone jars at any site in Toshka, only small lithic tools and stones for grinding. Finally, possibility 3. This photo is from some other expedition, and the museum mislabeled it. There were many expeditions to that area, so viewers with too much time on their hands can go through all their reports and try to ID this photo. There's actually yet another version of this now infamous Toshka Museum display, where we see yet another photo.
They come to us from sites that have been dated as far back as 14,500 years at a place called Toshka. This is a picture of it. You can quite clearly see there are vessels laying around all over the place. Except
again, this photo is not from Toshka. It was taken in 1907 at Maris Markos by Reisner. This is the inventory of this site, 41,300. There were no stone jars found there, just pottery. Besides Toshka, we're shown other sites, supposedly with hard stone vases.
Here's some more examples from areas like Toshka. If you take a close-up look at this one up top here, this absolutely looks like stone to me. This image, the zoom in of this image here. And then something else interesting is happening even in these very ancient pre-dynastic burials. We have imitation going on. This is a pottery vessel. You see the spirals on it? So in a pre-dynastic burial, you already have pots where they are trying to make the pottery look like hard stone vessels.
This is grave 23-1, found in Dabod by Reisner in 1907. Nothing in this grave imitates anything else in this grave, because everything we see is pottery. Next photo.
This is a different site. We see large stone plates here.
Maris Markos, Site 41, graves 401 through 403, 1907, Reisner. No stone jars or stone plates. It's all pottery.
And they were being buried with them in these sites that go back as far as nearly 15,000 years ago. Who knows how much further? We just don't know.
To recap this section, any notion that stone jars in Egypt date to 12 or 14,000 years BC just went up in a puff of smoke. No stone jars were ever found in Toshka 8905, or any sites of that age. Only small lithic tools and stones for grinding. Most, if not all, images in Toshka photo montages like this one are from other sites. Ironically, all the photos falsely attributed to Toshka show no stone jars at all. This deceptive photo montage, or its variants, appears in at least 4 videos, as recent as a month ago. Currently, they have a total of more than 1 million views. The Streisand effect is a social phenomenon where attempts to hide or obfuscate some issue unintentionally have the opposite effect, namely to bring more attention to it. This deceptive Toshka photo montage is just like it. Instead of arguing for an ancient high-tech civilization, it highlights a glaring problem with this idea. To explain it, let's look at the timeline of stone jars in early Egypt. The curvy or barrel-shaped hard stone vases, which the vase team has scanned, first appear in the Naqada 1 period. Radiocarbon studies date Naqada 1 to about 3900 BC onwards. Badarian stone vessels are a bit older. They date back to between 4400 and 4000 BC. They are very rare. We'll return to their interesting shapes later. This timeline shows cultures and stone artifacts in pre-dynastic Egypt. This is Toshka. Hard stone vases begin to show up in the record at this point. So here's the big problem. If early Egypt had inherited hard stone vases from a civilization that existed in 10,000 BC and earlier, then we should see these inherited vases during this entire long period that follows. We have this giant, glaring gap of more than 5,000 years where inherited stone vases should be found, but they mysteriously aren't. In honor of the now infamous Toshka site, we'll call this long vase-free period the Toshka Gap. This gap cannot be reconciled with the idea of inheritance, because inheritance requires continuity of artifacts. If there's no continuity, there's no inheritance. The simple, rational explanation for why hard stone vases appear in graves only at this point, not sooner, is because that's when the cultures which created the burials started making these vases. In the past, when Toshka seemed to fit their narrative, proponents of inheritance went out of their way to stress the cultural continuity all the way back to Toshka, the similarity of burials and the like.
Similar to Naqada, many cultures lived here over the years, thousands of years. Prehistoric people, 10,000 BC, all the way up to the Greeks, the Romans, the Coptics. So another big, quote-unquote cemetery.
Most of the images and even recreations of pre-dynastic burials all seem quite similar. A primitive, shallow grave with a skeleton or skeletons in the fetal position, and often accompanied by primitive hand-formed pottery, bead and bone ornaments and tools, and occasionally, of course, hard stone vases. This is true for burials of the Nadak culture, a precursor culture close to the time of the early dynastic period, and it's also true for far older burials like that of Toshka that I've mentioned before, dated to 14,000 years ago.
They also clearly accept the radiocarbon dating of Toshka. This means that the Toshka gap has a firm starting point and that it is continuous. They can't now argue against this. In addition to the gap, let's ask a few more questions. There are other pre-dynastic stone artifacts: arrowheads, knives, blades, mace heads, and pallets. In all categories, the objects show signs of being developed over time. The pallets probably started out as simple grinding stones, and they culminated in the famous Narmer piece. So why weren't these categories of stone objects inherited? Seems like the proposed ancient high-tech civilization left behind only vases, and no other useful, well-made stone tools. Let's now return to the Badarian vessels. Many tend to have a distinct shape, a conical body and a protruding brim, like an inverted top hat. This shape preference is also visible in their ivory objects. Moreover, Badarians didn't seem to bury their stone vases in graves, only pottery. These differences, compared to pre-dynastic stone vases elsewhere, suggest a separate development of objects and customs, and not simply copying some supposed inherited sources. Production of hard stone vessels declined in Egypt towards the end of the Old Kingdom. They still show up, just very rarely. Advocates of inheritance say it's because Egyptians ran out of the inherited vessels and had no skills to make them. But there's a problem. Those who make such claims are so heavily focused on Egypt that they forget Minoan Crete. Starting at roughly the middle of the Old Kingdom, ancient Egypt and Crete coexisted. Minoan Crete made hard stone vases, though not many, after the time of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Here they are. If Minoans could make them, it means people in Bronze Age could make them, even if they were out of fashion in Egypt or were no longer economical there. Of course, the expected response to this will be that Minoans somehow got a part of the hypothetical vase stash inherited by the Egyptians. They just lasted Minoans longer. But this can't be the case. Why? Because Minoan hard stone vessels include original designs completely absent in Egypt, such as this obsidian chalice, or this stunning drinking cup shaped like a spiral shell. There are no such designs in Egypt, which means that it's Minoans who made these, not someone else. A number of false claims about the pre-dynastic Naqada culture are made in this context. Let's briefly go through these.
They were found in the Naqada culture, Naqada 1, Naqada 2. These are the precursors to the dynastic Egyptians. You're talking like 5,000–7,000 BC.
No, Naqada carbon dates to only 3,900 BC. Sounds like someone's trying to fudge the numbers by 3,000 years.
Everything else you find from these cultures, from these times, it's bone, it's beads, very primitive. They have to admit that there's literally no other stonework being done like this at that time. There's no statuary, there's no architecture.
We wouldn't exactly call the massive Naqada royal tomb no architecture, given that its facade defined an art motif for the next few thousand years, including in Giza. These delicate ivory reliefs aren't exactly just bone. These finely crafted palettes and soft stone vessels don't really qualify as mere beads, and neither does the great mace head of the Scorpion King. The inheritance advocates say that early Egyptians, unable to copy the hard stone vessels they supposedly inherited, switched over to the softer alabaster, and that Imhotep somehow directed this process.
And then, it all just changed to alabaster after that because Imhotep came along and just figured out a new method of making vessels. I think exactly what was happening was Imhotep, being a genius, found out a way to imitate these hard stone vessels with alabaster.
Point 1. There is zero evidence that Imhotep had anything to do with making stone vessels. Point 2. Nobody quote-unquote switched to alabaster in the Old Kingdom. Alabaster and limestone vessels were already made in the pre-dynastic era, along the hard stone ones, just like in the Old Kingdom. Throughout the whole early Egypt era, hard and soft stone vessels existed at the same time to serve different needs and different customers. Curiously, when inheritance proponents show Old Kingdom soft stone vessels, we're usually shown the not-so-great ones.
I've also seen some requests for handmade ancient artifacts to be measured or scanned. While I certainly think that this is worth doing, you really don't need to scan these sorts of artifacts to see just how not precise they are. I often point to the industry of alabaster vessel manufacturing that emerged after the Third Dynasty. And by simply using your eyes, you can observe that they're not precision-made artifacts. They're out of round, they're not symmetrical, not balanced, and are certainly the product of relatively primitive handmade processes using flint or other hard stones.
This makes it sound like the Old Kingdom lost the ability to both work hard stone and make clean geometric shapes. This is not true. Old Kingdom craftsmen were perfectly able to make clean geometric shapes, as seen here. Workmanship differs in quality in all eras. An honest research into the possible use of lathe-like techniques in early Egypt would include all well-made stone vases, not just the hard stone ones. The defenders of inheritance keep belaboring the point that some pottery imitates hard stone vases.
So we're already in realms of technology that are well beyond what we think the dynastic Egyptians were capable of. You see this all over the place. This is a hard stone vase on the right, displayed next to a handmade, not spun pottery, clay pottery vase. And you'll notice that the clay pottery vase has even been painted to look like granite. Right? It's imitation. And this wasn't spun on a wheel, this was handmade, but because they were found in the same burial, they're attributed to the same people.
Firstly, before you say these two specific vases were found in the same burial, you need to show evidence for it. Secondly, and more importantly, all this is irrelevant, as knockoffs don't tell you where the imitated items come from, only that they're desirable. We also have knockoffs today, but the imitated items were not inherited from an older civilization. They're made today at the same time as the knockoffs. Cheap and expensive items in the same category are made in all eras. The cheaper ones do not tell you anything about the origin of the expensive ones. Why bring up points that make zero difference in terms of making your case? There is one excavation photo that may actually show a grave with a stone jar in situ. This is Petrie's photo from Naqada, previously unpublished, so the vase type is unknown. The photo on the left is unidentified. This page says it's from Naqada 3, without naming the source. There's no evidence that any vessels in this photo are made of stone. The label just says containers and pots. Neither photo adds anything new to the subject, because Naqada hard stone vases are well known, and no one disputes this. Again, why show photos which bring nothing new to the table?